I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Liz Flahive and Carly Mensch, the creators of Roar, the new anthology series on Apple TV Plus. And I want to start with how, this is based on a collection of short stories by Cecilia Ahern. What was it about her stories that felt like they would lend themselves to be kind of cinematic or be adaptable to a TV show? We could start with Liz.
I think when we first read them, the thing that really drew us in were just how sticky the ideas and images were. So they sort of, even though we didn't know exactly how we would accomplish actually adapting any of these, I think the idea of a woman eating photographs or a woman on a shelf or a woman disappearing literally felt like an idea or an image we actually couldn't let go of. And I think it took us, all the time up until filming to figure out how to actually execute these. But yeah, I think that was the thing that really jumped out at us initially.
Well, I'm curious if you could also give insight into why you chose these specific stories that you chose, because there's like 30 stories, I think, in this collection. So I'd love to know sort of how you landed on those particular stories and what that process was. Carly.
Sure. Well, the first one that we adapted was The Woman Who Found Bite Marks, which felt very close to us as working moms juggling loads of maternal guilt with ambition. So that story felt really close and felt like a good introduction to kind of how we would jump into a story like this and find space for ourselves and flesh out a character. From there, it was really a kind of like hopscotching around, again, things that were sticky, as Liz said. We also worked with three incredible writers, Janine Neighbors, Vera Santamaria, Hallie Pfeiffer. And we did something a little unconventional, at least for us, which was we handed them the book with no marching orders and just asked them to read, see what they responded to. And all three of them chose stories that are not three that Liz and I had kind of deeply considered and felt an urgent need to translate for the screen, but they made their separate cases of kind of why they were emotionally resonant for them, and we got excited by their excitement. And then for the other ones that Liz and I picked, there were a lot of stories that kind of on the surface felt like they might be right for Roar, and then we would kind of play around for a bit and realize, oh, there isn't enough of a story shape here, or there isn't enough of a kind of emotional journey within this like amazing piece of commentary within the metaphor. So we would kind of have to try some out, but it was a dance of kind of what spoke to us. Like shelf was something from the beginning that like almost like tormented us. Like how the heck could you make a television, an episode of television where a woman sits on a shelf the entire time? So we kind of put that in we're definitely going to have to try this one. And others kind of were more of like a slow burn where we would, a few weeks later, we'd still be thinking about something, still be chewing on something. I think there's a lot of other stories we're still pretty excited to at least take on as a dare if we got more. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you're working in this kind of surreal lens, magical realism with most of the episodes, actually. I'm just curious with the writing process, what the challenges were there in terms of not only writing the episodes, but also giving each of them their own kind of self-contained sort of feeling and like almost like a different genre for each episode.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of actually writing them, I feel like a lot of these episodes really flowed once we sort of had our way in. I think something we learned pretty quickly in the writing was you sort of got on the train with the conceit and you just jumped in. There wasn't a ton of backstory necessarily. It was really like a sort of forward moving train. And I think in terms of figuring out the magical realism or the surrealism of each episode, they each really are their own magic trick, and each of them was like each of them had like these incredible opportunities and challenges for us in terms of just producerially how to make it, in a very technical, boring way, like how high is the shelf? Can we build a wall into an existing house and make it look substantial but real? Like, where is the line between the emotional journey of the character and the magic of the idea? I think we were really conscientious about the fact that like you had to care about these women as much as you cared about the sort of magic of the episode. So I think we were always trying to balance those two things. But yeah, they were all kind of impossible in their way. Like how do we actually put Merritt Wever in a scene with a duck and make that viable? How do we build the grotesqueness of the bite marks? I think everyone had its own challenge. And I think the thing that was great was that we had these amazing actresses at the center who were so spectacular and could really hold on to their characters and their emotional journeys. So we were able to really play because we had such pros carrying each episode.
Right. I was definitely curious about the production itself, and how you went about assembling all 8 episodes, all taking place in different locations, requiring very different things. Was it sort of like segmented in order, or was it like you're figuring out the right look for the shelf while you're also on the phone with like the duck handler for another episode?
Yeah, nailed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And also, like we were learning so much on the fly. Usually you make a pilot and you learn a lot and you take everything you've learned and you incorporate it into the show as quickly as possible. And we would learn certain things, and then others, we would learn on day 1 of the 4th episode. We're 4 episodes in, and here we are like back to basics, learning some, I remember when we were filming The Woman Who Solved Her Own Murder, and it was like day 1, fresh start. And we did the first scene and we're like, something doesn't sound right. And then we realized we hadn't actually cracked how we were going to have a ghost be in the scenes. Like, should she be listening? Should she be waiting for her line? Should other people? And then in a production level, we had to bring the sound guys in to have a powwow about, okay, if we're going to be doing overlapping dialogue this entire time, because the whole point is that they can't hear her. Is that going to be a problem? Do we have to kind of rethink how we record the sound of this one episode, which now is its own, challenge / opportunity for us? So yeah, we shot many concurrently. We literally shot 2 concurrently. Liz was in Australia filming The Woman Who ate photographs at the same time as we were filming The Woman Who Disappeared. So we were literally concurrently, but we were prepping very concurrently the whole time. It was a circus.
I imagine it takes a lot of organization skills and communication in that regard.
It does. We have we have an incredible crew, and even with an incredible crew, we were so underwater. Like, it just is very hard to make distinct episodes of television at like at I think like a really intense level production wise. So yeah, it was a deep challenge.
Yeah.
And we had to keep asking people, like, we're trying to tell you what's ahead, but like, we all need to get better at anticipation, and we all need to communicate what our needs are. Because if you think you're going to need extra crew, please tell us now. We would rather know that.
Right. Well, there's also so much star power on the show, as you're alluding to, Nicole Kidman, Issa Rae, Cynthia Erivo. You have these people that you've worked with before on Glow, like Alison Brie and Betty Gilpin, Merritt Wever, who you worked with on Nurse Jackie. What was it that sort of excited them about wanting to be a part of the show?
I can't speak for them, but I feel like the thing that was great on our side was that, we had all the scripts written before we started filming, which we never did with Glow.
New for us.
Yeah, we were always filming and writing at the same time, as like a race to the finish. But, we had a great process with each of the actors. We sent them the script. If they responded, they got on the phone with us. And if we weren't the writer, with the writer as well. And we all just talked, and, we incorporated their thoughts into a draft, and, we had rehearsals with them. And it was just for very, very busy women, who all of them are, I think they, much like the writers, like if they connected to the script and connected to the character and felt like excited by the fact that they hadn't necessarily done something like this before, I think that was really the thing that seemed to draw people in.
Our joke was, our last show, Glow, we tended to know if someone was right for Glow if they were game to do their own wrestling. And I think here there was a similar kind of like, if you're game to let us, cover you in bite marks or act with a duck, then you're probably right for this project. If that excites you, come on over.
I did want to pinpoint a few episodes here. Certainly that one with Merritt Weaver is naturally just stands out just on the log line alone, that she talks to a duck and they get into some kind of a relationship, you could say. And Liz, I know that you directed that one. Could you talk about just the logistics of putting that all together and maybe why you wanted to direct that one in particular?
I mean, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about logistics.
Fair.
It was extraordinary. I feel like each of them, again, like walking in, I hadn't initially planned to direct the episode, but Carly and other producers came to me and said they thought I should because they knew I was hungry to direct. And I think, like in terms of prepping it, there was the technical side of the ducks and training 7 ducks and figuring out how to prep shooting with a human and an animal, and planning for potential CG, which we ended up not really using.
Not planning for a human and a duck, human and 7 ducks.
7 ducks, yeah. Which is the duck that's good at listening? Which is the duck that's good at walking? Which is the duck that's crazy enough to do all the flapping during the sex scene? We had ducks with
the number of times that Liz would have to leave because she had to go to a duck rehearsal was in terms of the juggle of the show. It's like, oh, Liz has got another
duck meeting. So yeah, it was super weird, but also, the way we talked about it, and luckily we had Justin Kirk, who voiced Larry, on set with us every single day. So in terms of, actually creating those performances, I feel like, we would do rehearsals just like we would do any other rehearsal, except Justin would be crouched down on the floor acting with Merritt, and then we'd have him off camera doing his lines. And she was able to actually act opposite a real duck. So she was, she had to be in on the magic trick too. Everybody needed to, understand the story that we were telling, and that it wasn't a gag. We weren't, as much as it's like a juicy log line, it is a story about an emotionally toxic relationship. And that was always how we addressed it, in rehearsal, in conversation, as we were filming. The crew was also really respectful of the fact that Merritt was doing weird, vulnerable work, and that the ducks were also animals we were trying to treat with a lot of respect and care. And that was sort of, I feel like that was the cool thing about everybody on this show. Everyone was really in it together. And we just figured out somehow to make that episode in 8 days.
I'll also put in my producer hat and say, why we thought Liz was right for the episode is that we never wanted that episode to be a stunt. And we knew that, certain people may have kind of come in and seen the episode as such, but like we had never spoken about it as anything other than the relationship between a woman and an emotionally abusive guy who happens to be a duck. And I knew that Liz would be extremely rigorous about the emotional arc of that story, and would filter every choice through what served that, rather than kind of what would be funny, what would be kind of strange and a kind of
just strange for strange's sake.
Strange for strange sake is never what we want. We wanted, we spent like weeks deciding whether the duck's mouth should move. And I think that's a tribute to how seriously Liz took the premise, which kudos, because I love how it turned out.
Yeah, there is always that emotional core through each episode, no matter what the gag is, as you would say.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a credit to everyone involved here. But what I also wanted to talk about is just the last episode, which there's this sort of magical realism element to pretty much every episode. But I do think the last one kind of breaks from that convention a little, where it's about a teenage girl, not a woman like the rest of them. But it's also the one that feels most grounded in reality, I would say, just something you would naturally see. What went into that decision?
Yeah, at the beginning we spent, a bunch of time obviously talking about what makes a Roar story. since they're so disparate, and obviously they're in different genres, and there's some different tones. And for us, it was clear that on some level, genre wasn't what made a Roar story. What made a Roar story was taking a trope and twisting it, was taking something that made us uncomfortable and, turning up the volume to 100 and seeing what that did to a story. And for us, it started with a few different impulses, that episode. That episode started with, first to start, our kind of feelings about the Western genre in general, and kind of its inherent misogynies and tropes. And so once we were kind of talking about tropes, we were starting to like hone in on, okay, there's something Rory about this. And then there was a lot of early conversations about violence, and violence in storytelling, and violence, especially like teenage male rage, and why there wasn't really a female equivalent to that. But then once we were exploring that, we wanted to honor that and think about like, teenage girls have rage. What would be a good container for that? But how could it look differently than kind of how it would if it was male? I think those are most of our early conversations, Liz. It sounds scattershot.
Yeah, so. But I think it is sort of like, again, taking something and turning it on its head, taking a Western and putting two teen girls at the center, taking a sort of revenge story and letting it go somewhere it doesn't normally go. And, I think and then we had just like this very small impulse, which is like, girls are like, there are lots of like, especially like nerd girls who love horses growing up, right. There's like a sort of like, there's like a horse thing that happens with girls. I don't know. And that like,
one's ever connected that to the Western genre.
Yeah, it's like, it's never a thing that sort of like for the number of girls who love horses, like you just don't see that in the sort of pantheon of like, Western storytelling really. So I don't know, I feel like we were trying to mess with a couple different things, and use it to sort of turn a Western on its head, which just felt really fun and really cinematic. And I think it gave, I feel like So Young Kim, who directed the hell out of it, and Q Tran, our DP, it was so fun to see them dig into making a Western, because like you just realize, like, as much as I think, there are many more opportunities for female directors, like there is still something about getting at scale, that I think is another thing about the Western. Like, you're like, go men, and shoot the mountains and ride on the horses. And I feel like, I don't know, just watching the two of them come to us, and they're like, we need more expanse, we need more riding. And we're like, totally, go for it. So it was just fun to see them, gobbling up the sort of the privileges that come with getting to make a Western and doing it our way. It was really cool.
And to say, like, they kept taking selfies because they're like, when have you seen two Asian women making a Western together?
Yeah.
It
was awesome.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. We only have about a minute or so left, but just curious if there are other stories from Cecilia's book, or stories that you've just personally been thinking about that if you had the chance you would want to adapt into a second season perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are. That book is, again, I think finding, and working with writers who would attach to particular stories was, I think, part of the joy of making this, because it was unexpected for us. There are definitely more stories in that collection that we wanted to adapt, and have like a short list of,
but we shall not reveal here. Yeah. So
but I
do, and you shall.
Worth a shot.
They're there, but I do think it is that thing too, where you're like, now that it exists, and we see how far some of them could go. Like, I think it would be interesting to see what other writers and directors, where they would take, how they would elevate and escalate another season of this show. It would be really cool. So that would be my answer.
Yes. Well, hopefully you do get that chance, because I do kind of want to see what other genres you could even go into at this point.
Yeah.
Limit. Yes. Well, for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Liz, Carly, thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much.